It is permissible to have liquid-tight conduit share the same building opening as condenser lines. There are no explicit prohibitions against this practice in standard electrical or building codes, provided that certain conditions are met to ensure safety and proper installation. Firstly, it is crucial to maintain adequate separation and support for both the conduit and the condenser lines. This separation helps prevent any physical contact or interference that could damage either system. Secondly, proper sealing of the opening is essential to prevent the ingress of moisture, pests, or other environmental elements into the building. This can be achieved through the use of appropriate sealing compounds or methods. Thirdly, both the liquid-tight conduit and the condenser lines must be installed in accordance with all applicable codes and regulations. This includes using approved materials and methods for both systems and ensuring that they are properly grounded and bonded. Liquid-tight conduit is a type of flexible electrical conduit used to protect wiring in wet or damp locations. It is typically made of a flexible metal or plastic core with a liquid-tight outer jacket. Condenser lines, on the other hand, are part of an air conditioning or refrigeration system and carry refrigerant between the condenser unit and the evaporator. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, does not specifically address the issue of running liquid-tight conduit alongside condenser lines in the same building opening. However, the NEC does contain general requirements for the installation of electrical wiring and equipment, including requirements for protection against physical damage and environmental factors. Similarly, building codes may contain requirements for the installation of mechanical systems such as air conditioning and refrigeration, including requirements for protection against environmental factors and fire safety. In practice, it is common to see liquid-tight conduit and condenser lines share in the same building opening, particularly in commercial and industrial buildings. This is often done to save space and simplify installation. However, it is important to ensure that the installation is performed correctly and that all applicable codes and regulations are followed. When installing liquid-tight conduit and condenser lines in the same building opening, it is important to consider the following factors. Firstly, the size and type of the opening. The opening should be large enough to accommodate both the conduit and the condenser lines without crowding or stressing either system. The type of opening may also affect the installation method, such as whether it is necessary to use a sealing compound or other means of preventing moisture ingress. Secondly, the type of liquid-tight conduit and condenser lines being used. The type of conduit and lines will affect the installation method and the type of supports and fasteners that are required. For example, some types of liquid-tight conduit may require special fittings or connectors to maintain the liquid-tight seal. Thirdly, the environmental conditions at the building opening. The environmental conditions, such as temperature, humidity, and exposure to sunlight, may affect the choice of materials and installation methods. For example, if the opening is exposed to direct sunlight, it may be necessary to use a UV-resistant conduit and lines. Fourthly, the applicable codes and regulations. The applicable codes and regulations will dictate the specific requirements for the installation of both the liquid-tight conduit and the condenser lines. It is important to consult with a qualified electrician or contractor to ensure that the installation complies with all applicable requirements. In addition to these factors, it is also important to consider the potential for future maintenance or repairs. The installation should be designed in such a way that it is easy to access both the conduit and the condenser lines for maintenance or repairs. This may involve providing adequate clearance around the systems and using removable supports or fasteners. The NEC, specifically Article 350, addresses flexible metal conduit, which liquid-tight flexible metal conduit, or LFMC, falls under. Article 350.12 deals with securing and supporting the conduit. It states that LFMC must be securely fastened within 12 inches of termination points and supported at intervals not exceeding 4.5 feet. This ensures that the conduit is properly supported and prevents strain on the connections. Article 350.20 focuses on uses not permitted. Although it doesn't directly forbid sharing an opening with condenser lines, it restricts LFMC from use where subject to physical damage. This is a consideration when placing it alongside condenser lines that could potentially be moved or serviced. Article 356 covers Liquidtight Flexible Non-Metallic Conduit, or LFNC. Similar to LFMC, Article 356.30 specifies securing and supporting requirements. LFNC must be fastened within 12 inches of terminations and supported at intervals not exceeding 3 feet. This is because non-metallic conduit is typically less rigid than metallic conduit. Article 356.12 addresses uses not permitted for LFNC, again, not explicitly forbidding shearing and opening with condenser lines, but restricting its use where exposed to physical damage or where temperatures exceed its rating. When dealing with electrical installations near HVAC equipment, it's also crucial to consider grounding and bonding requirements. The NEC Article 250 covers grounding and bonding to ensure electrical safety. Proper grounding and bonding help to minimize the risk of electrical shock and provide a path for fault current to flow back to the source, tripping over current protection devices. Article 300.11 pertains to securing and supporting wiring. It emphasizes that wiring methods must be securely supported and fastened to structural elements of the building. This is important to prevent strain on conductors and connections. When installing wiring near condenser lines, ensure that the wiring is adequately supported and separated from the lines to prevent any potential damage. Furthermore, when running conduit through a building opening, it is essential to seal the opening properly to prevent the entry of moisture, dust, and pests. The NEC Article 300.4 addresses protection against physical damage. It states that wiring must be protected from physical damage during and after installation. This includes protecting wiring from sharp edges, abrasion, and other potential hazards. When passing conduit through a building opening, ensure that the edges of the opening are smooth and that the conduit is properly protected to prevent damage to the wiring inside. It is also important to consider the potential for condensation when running conduit through a building opening, especially if the opening is exposed to temperature differentials. Condensation can form inside the conduit and damage the wiring. To prevent condensation, it may be necessary to seal the conduit with a suitable sealant or to provide a means for draining any condensation that may accumulate. In addition to the NEC, local built-in codes and regulations may also apply to the installation of liquid-tight conduit and condenser lines. These codes and regulations may vary depending on the location and the type of building. It is important to consult with local authorities to ensure that the installation complies with all applicable requirements. In summary, while there is no direct prohibition against liquid-tight conduit and condenser lines shearing a building opening, you need to carefully consider all relevant factors. These factors are separation, support, sealing, grounding, and code compliance to ensure a safe and compliant installation. It is always best to consult with a qualified professional.